Something is happening in Belarus, silent, dark, and quite sinister. Following in Putin's footsteps, Lukashenko has significantly escalated tensions on the northern front, with military reserve call-ups and logistical preparations directed at the region. However, Belarus is hiding the real danger not in Ukraine, but deep underground along the borders of the Baltic Sea region countries. The risk centers include Lithuania and Poland.
When you look at the map, Belarus, located in the heart of Eastern Europe, is implementing a risky subterranean strategy meters below the ground, focusing on these two countries. Those billion-dollar steel barriers, built to protect Lithuania and Poland, are being circumvented by secret tunnel networks dug by Belarus. The dense forested areas stretching along this red line face the danger of turning into secret doors opening from underground straight to the heart of Europe.
Despite the high-tech cameras on the surface, we are no longer facing merely military exercises that can be monitored from satellites, but a dark hybrid warfare scenario that is being concealed even from ground-penetrating radars. In other words, while the whole world is talking about the military convoys that the Minsk administration is currently shifting toward the borders, the real infiltration operation is about to begin in the dark corridors beneath the soil.
Another vital element that should not be overlooked in this equation is where these subterranean and hybrid warfare tactics are geographically focused. When we expand the map a bit further, we can see that this tension concentrating underground at the Lithuanian and Polish borders is not a coincidental buildup. Over time, this could turn into a systematic war of attrition strategy that might even spill over into the Suwałki Gap, known as NATO's softest underbelly.
This narrow 65-kilometer strip of land wedged between Belarus and Russia's heavily militarized exclave of Kaliningrad on the Baltic Sea coast could become the ultimate testing ground for underground infiltration rehearsals. This is because Moscow and Minsk want to measure their capacity to paralyze the civil and military infrastructure around this corridor with gray zone tactics before a potential conventional crisis breaks out. However, the main focus of the current underground tunnel network moves by Belarus, which does not deviate from Putin's demands, is limited to two countries for now.
Now, let's take a much closer look at the Belarus-Lithuania borderline, because this intersection became highly dynamic and active in the last days of May regarding Belarus's underground tunnel strategy. In particular, a critical discovery by the Lithuanian border guards has laid bare the full extent of this underground chess game. The Lithuanian State Border Guard Service pressed the button for a highly critical operation in the Shonin district on May 26.
In that dark, tree-covered spot where visibility drops, they deciphered a brand new passageway extending from underground straight toward the heart of Lithuania. A total of 38 migrants attempting to infiltrate the country through this tunnel, which, although not a military engineering marvel, was dug to be highly functional, were caught red-handed by the border guards. Following the initial interrogation by the border guards, this entire group attempting to infiltrate underground was quickly pushed back to the Belarusian side in accordance with legal procedures.
But the remarkable element regarding this underground tunnel on the Belarus-Lithuania borderline is not limited to this, because the Chennai region, where the operation took place and the tunnel was located, is not a randomly chosen place. Due to its proximity to the capital, Vilnius, it serves as a perfect strategic infiltration point. This route, arranged to pass right underneath Lithuania's formidable fences, shows us very clearly how underground activities render physical barriers obsolete.
Even more strikingly, this incident is not the first underground corridor case we have encountered on the Lithuania-Belarus line in 2026, because just 20 days prior to the discovery of this latest tunnel on May 6, 2026, Lithuanian security forces had uncovered exactly this type of tunnel line in the Kabeli border outpost area in the Varna district. Springing into action when the border monitoring system suddenly triggered an alarm that night, the teams managed to thwart an underground infiltration attempt by a group of 18 people at the very last moment.
The first serious underground tunnel discovery of the year was recorded on April 6, 2026, in the dense forested terrain of the Baravanis village in the Vilnius district.
Thanks to security cameras and perimeter sensors detecting unusual soil movement, a plan by roughly 30 people to cross the borderline from underground was dismantled via a targeted operation. Looking at the anatomy of these tunnels on the Belarus-Lithuania borders, we see that they are generally only narrow enough for a single person to crawl through and are dug using entirely manual methods.
Even though they do not look like professional military infrastructure from the outside, they hold a strategic role capable of bypassing those high-tech protective shields on the surface to decipher these dark subterranean networks. Early on, Lithuanian border guards are forced to establish a multi-layered and complex electronic monitoring architecture along the borderline. Seismic and acoustic vibration sensors laid meters below the soil along the border instantly transmit even the slightest whisper or footstep during an excavation to the operations center.
Furthermore, AI-supported thermal cameras integrated into the 4-meter-high steel razor wire barriers capture even the slightest temperature change in the pitch black of night. In physical operations on the ground, surveillance drones, helicopters providing aerial support, and specially trained tracking dogs work in flawless synchronization. Lithuania's goal is to prevent any kind of military infiltration operations in the event of a potential crisis on the Belarusian borders.
However, on the Belarusian front, there is a tense atmosphere lately, not just regarding underground tunnel lines, but also in the air. Because while all this technological warfare is ongoing, another very different and tension-escalating incident took place on the evening of May 24, 2026. Again, in the same Salyniki district, a homemade unmanned aerial vehicle that silently entered Lithuania from Belarusian airspace was diverted from its route and brought down thanks to the border guard's electronic jamming systems.
Losing control under the intense pressure of anti-drone equipment, this aircraft crashed near the village of Dumble, just 500 meters inside the border.
This simultaneous activity, advancing both underground via tunnels and through the air via drones in the same region, proves just how complex a circle of hybrid threats the Vilnius administration is caught in. But the crises on the Belarusian borderlines do not stop there. When we trace the footsteps of this underground activity occurring on the Lithuanian border, our path leads straight to Poland, another western neighbor of Belarus.
The Polish border guard has long been combating such underground passageways in geographically vulnerable regions prone to infiltration like the Podlaski Volyonship and the Belovia Forest. Refreshing our memories, we recall that the most technically advanced and remarkable underground channel was discovered near the village of Nurivka in December 2025. The Narvka Tunnel, with its 100-meter length stretching beneath the border deep into Polish territory, emerges as a serious feat of engineering rather than a simple ditch. Reaching a height of 1.5 meters wide and fortified with concrete at certain points against the danger of collapse, this tunnel points to a level of planning far beyond an ordinary infiltration attempt.
Polish security sources harbor serious suspicions that the asymmetric underground tactics employed in Middle Eastern conflict zones were directly copied in the construction of this tunnel. Alongside this long line in Norvka, border guards had managed to uncover 3 other corridors with similar structural features in the forested areas of the Podlaki region. All of these tunnels pass right beneath those supposedly impenetrable 5-meter steel barriers that the Polish government poured billions of euros into building for border security. The Warsaw administration was forced to immediately inject an extra budget of 18 million euros into its border monitoring operations to respond to this rapidly growing insidious underground threat. With this new funding, deep ground-penetrating radars, highly sensitive seismic listening devices, and AI-supported acoustic analyzers were deployed along the borderline. Independent intelligence reports closely monitoring the region emphasize that these structures are the work of larger organizations providing direct logistical support, not simple smuggling networks.
These findings surfacing on Polish soil very clearly summarize the likelihood of how underground tactics have been transformed into a systematic strategy to infiltrate the European Union.
These underground operations, conducted simultaneously on the Lithuanian and Polish borders, are forcing the defense concept in Eastern Europe out of a 2-dimensional plane and into a 3-dimensional struggle that also encompasses the underground. So why are these underground corridors constantly popping up on the Belarusian border, And what is the main goal? Military strategists and intelligence analysts agree that these tunnel lines could serve as incubation centers for much more dangerous scenarios in the event of a potential regional crisis.
Within the asymmetric warfare doctrine that the Minsk administration carries out shoulder to shoulder with Russia, these dark corridors have the potential to turn into a secret military infiltration point at any moment. In the case of a sudden border conflict in the region, these tunnels could provide ready ground for small sabotage squads or specially trained light infantry units to infiltrate Lithuania and Poland. Because along with these underground tunnels, Belarus could gain the potential advantage of stealth.
Those billion-dollar thermal cameras or high-tech steel fences above the border can unfortunately sometimes be left helpless in the face of these silent operations conducted underground. In other words, the presence of underground lines is creating a profoundly deep fracture in the perception of border security on the eastern flank of NATO and the European Union. Looking at it from a military logistics standpoint, even though these tunnels are too narrow to pass large tanks or armored vehicles, they are virtually tailor-made for asymmetric wars of attrition.
A sudden assault aimed at critical infrastructure facilities, military logistics centers, or communication networks just behind the border could be initiated within minutes using these secret passageways. This situation also forces the Lithuanian and Polish armies to remain on constant high alert at the border, causing them to expend far more military personnel and technological resources there. Ultimately, the Belarus and Russia alliance distracts with massive military drills on the surface, all while keeping the Western Bloc constantly on edge with these low-cost yet high-impact systems built underground. Despite all these asymmetric risks posed by the underground tunnels, the likelihood of Belarus using these lines to launch a direct military infiltration against Lithuania or Poland in the near term remains quite slim on the table. This is because the Minsk administration knows perfectly well that any spark of conflict it ignites on its western borders will be met not just by two European nations, but by a much larger and far more devastating front. Successive harsh statements coming particularly from the Ukrainian military wing clearly prove on the map just how heavy the price of a single wrong move by Belarusian would be. With his widely discussed statement on May 26, 2026, Robert Madar Brody, commander of the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces, practically fired a final warning flare at the Minsk administration. Commander Brody announced that exactly 500 strategic targets within Belarusian territory are already locked in to be struck if Alexander Lukashenko enters the war or orders an attack against neighboring countries. Among these 500 targets, pinpointed inch by Ukrainian intelligence, are command centers, logistical depots, and massive ammunition bases, considered the backbone of the Belarusian army. This uncompromising stance displayed by Kyiv reflects on the ground as the most concrete and effective deterrent element developed against Belarus's ambitious military buildups along the borderlines. Actually, intelligence reports have already reflected that the Belarusian army is constructing new military training grounds and logistical routes in areas close to the Ukrainian border. The State Border Guard Service of Ukraine is tracking every single nail being hammered into Belarusian soil, moment by moment, via satellites, during these tense days when border militarization is gaining speed. Although the Lukashenko administration is trying to fill its officer ranks by making selective reserve call-ups on the army's western flank, it lacks the power to withstand a full-scale war with its current capacity. The sudden conscription of reserve officers through moves like Decree No. 132 coming from the presidential desk is in reality nothing more than an effort to test the army's internal mobilization speed. However, such partial and covert mobilization tactics will never be enough to stop the potential devastation that would be unleashed by the modern long-range missiles and advanced drone fleets currently held by Ukraine. Minsk, continually flexing its military muscles on the western border, namely the NATO side, is read more as a message of loyalty to its own domestic audience and the Kremlin, rather than aiming for a strategic victory. Lukashenko's words from the podium on May 13, 2026, "We will not just sit and wait," are actually the clearest confession of the deep strategic dilemma the country is currently in. The second the Belarusian administration embarks on a dangerous adventure against Lithuania or Poland using those underground tunnels it trusts so much, it will find itself facing not just these two powerful states, but also a locked Ukrainian army. This massive triple pincer and the balance of military deterrence in the region stand before Belarus as the thickest wall preventing it from turning its underground corridors into an active invasion line. Border security along the geopolitical fault lines of Eastern Europe can no longer be ensured simply with lines drawn on maps or high steel barriers erected on the surface. These new generation hybrid strategies that Belarus carries out shoulder to shoulder with Russia have turned border defense into a multi-dimensional chessboard, with both invisible drones in the sky and dark tunnels beneath the earth. While Lithuania and Poland are currently dealing heavy blows to these underground infiltration attempts with their billion-dollar technological investments and seismic sensor networks, it is quite difficult to say that the threat has been completely uprooted. Nevertheless, the delicate balance of power in the region and that clear 500 target retaliation plan put on the table by Ukraine are enough to block the Minsk administration from turning these underground corridors into a strategic military move. This silent war, waged meters below ground and away from the eyes of the whole world, looks like it will continue to be one of the greatest tests shaping the security architecture of Eastern Europe in the period ahead. In fact, all of Europe is on high alert against these types of risks. The Baltic countries in particular have been forced to revamp their defense doctrines from top to bottom. The Baltic Defense Line project, jointly implemented by Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, is no longer just about dragon's teeth or anti-tank minefields planned to stop tanks on the surface.
This colossal initiative has transformed into an integrated reaction mechanism designed against a simultaneous pincer movement that could come from Kieminrad, incorporating underground seismic networks, cyber defense shields, and electronic warfare units. The transformation of the Baltic Sea into a virtual NATO lake, with the accession of Sweden and Finland to the alliance, has greatly restricted Russia's asymmetric room for maneuver at sea.
Moscow, whose maneuvering space at sea has narrowed, is now far more reliant than before on these overland hybrid operations conducted via Belarus in order to keep the Kaliningrad connection alive and exert pressure on the West. Ultimately, this new potential danger, opened underground by Belarus and logistically supported by Moscow, could be the start of a grueling marathon that will test not only Europe's military deterrence, but also its technological adaptability and institutional resilience for many years to come.